Shalom, shalom. Glad to be doing a video on this monster memoir because I love monster memoirs, just do. This glittery sweatshirt is the most blinged out thing I have in honor of Tina Knowles, such a glamour goddess, but it's really hot today. I don't know if I can keep this thing on, honestly, but we'll see how long I last in it. Tina Knowles' memoir, Matriarch, the book review. This book was amazing. I love it. It's a story that her story just needs to be out there. You know, if you're looking for like the secret origin story of Beyonce, yeah, you'll get that, but that's like at the very end. It really is Tina Knowles' story. And it just is such a good book and all. I mean, just look at the cover. That is everything you could possibly want out of a book cover. I will say Tina Knowles did miss out on the opportunity to call the book Destiny's Mother, but then again, well, she is the mother of Destiny, so I guess it would just be called Destiny or all, or well, okay, but still. Matriarch is to her and also a homage to her women down her line, the mothers and mothers and mothers as well, because they also are integral parts of the story as well. Like I said, this is a story that just needs to be told. Is it the best written memoir? No, it's very long, which is good. The writing, I mean, I think there were some editing goofs that could have been caught. The structure was a little clunky and a little all over the place. But you know what? Tina's personality was just so amazing in it. It just shined through. I forgive all of that. It's just a very long book and a very long, wonderful saga. Before I actually go into her story, I just gotta address, I think it's funny because Tina's last name is Beyonce, which is Beyonce's first name. The name Beyonce has a very interesting origin. It's not supposed to be Beyonce, it's supposed to be Beyonce. And why did the spelling change? When Tina was born, well, Tina's one of 7 kids. All 7 kids have a variation of the spelling of the name. So what is even the correct spelling? I don't even know. And when they were born, the nurses would miswrite the name and they wouldn't change it because they'd just be like, well, just be thankful that, you know, your kids are getting a birth certificate and they can be documented. That's insane, right? But that's not the first time I read a story about Black people in the segregated South having their names miswritten on birth certificates, either just out of spite or just because of inattentive nurses. I would imagine probably Beyonce probably is an incorrect version of some kind of spelling going generations back. It was probably spelled many different ways going back quite a while. Beyonce has a cousin, Angela, with the last name Beyonce, so that name has all sorts of changes across the generations and spreading on the family line. Both Tina's parents are of Creole French origin, like really hardcore Creole French origin, which I'll get into. But also, I want to address something, a bit of a, I guess, maybe conspiracy theory about Tina, and I could be wrong about this. I think Tina's parents were related. I think they were like very distant cousins or something like that. Because Beyonce is her dad's last name, but then she mentions that appearing later on her mom's side of the family, and her mom's maiden name, Darion, or I guess Darion. Also, she makes a passing reference to that being on her dad's side of the family also with another relative. Both her parents came from a small isolated island town in Louisiana where generations upon generations of slaves and former slaves stayed on there. And she then later, in a very passing line in the story, mentions 2 very distant relatives of hers dating each other. So I don't think that's a totally out-of-the-box assumption. I could be wrong, but I do think they were like distant cousins. Okay, so now let's get into Tina herself. She was born in 1954, born and raised in Galveston, Texas. And Galveston is a very important part of her childhood. I learned so much about it. Tina was born Celestine Ann Beyonce, but Celestine Ann was a very, very, very difficult name to pronounce for everyone, and eventually it got to be called Tina, or some childhood nickname of hers was Badass Teeny B. Personally, I think Celestine is a pretty name. Sometimes the variation could be Celestina, but I think more commonly people would probably know people named by Celeste, but either way. Both Tina's parents had, I think, at most a middle school education and came from a small island town in Louisiana, not too far from Galveston. And Tina grew up one of 7 kids, and they all lived in a 2-bedroom house. The beginning of the book is a little bit it takes Tina a while for her writing to find a good rhythm, because the book just opens randomly on like a random December day in her childhood, and then kind of goes back and forth between like a day in the life of her life at that time, and then just a bunch of other information about her family and her life in general. So it was very difficult to kind of follow what time period she was in. She was born on her older sister's 10th birthday, and the thing is also, when it comes to saying sister, she's one of 7 kids, but so much of her extended family was in the area, and also her parents were kind of like community leaders of like the Black community in the neighborhood, that like even non-biological people are called sisters or cousins in a lot of ways. So just everyone in that neighborhood was her family. Tina's parents were actually quite older when she was born. They were actually in their 50s. I mean, they were already grandparents by then because her older siblings had kids. And as I said, Tina's nickname was Badass Teeny B. So badass is a much older word than I thought. Interesting. And this is a very integral part of Tina and her identity herself. Tina's mom was a seamstress, and Tina comes from a line of seamstresses. So Tina talked a lot about her family history, and it is such a beautiful history. It was difficult to follow because, again, her writing was all over the place. So she jumps between talking about like great-grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-great, and she kind of bounces back and forth. So it's kind of hard to follow. I think I got the lineage down and everything. Going back to about 1800, her great-great-great-grandmother, Rosalie, was born a slave. Rosalie would have Celestine at around 1826. And at this time, parents were typically separated from their children at birth, but Rosalie managed to keep Celestine and did raise her as a daughter. They were separated later. Celestine would also be born a slave, and when she was a teenager, she had 2 children with the grandson of the slave holder. Celestine was a teenager at this time, and that grandson, the father of her children, was either a teenager or a little bit older than that. Given the historical time period, I think it's safe to say that having these kids was not consensual. So in 1853, the slave owner of the plantation in Louisiana died, leaving everything to the widow and grandson. The grandson, I think his name was Eloy or Elroy, bought Celestine and the 2 kids he had with her, and Rosalie was separated and sent somewhere else. So Celestine and Rosalie, after a long time together, were then separated apart. At least Celestine did get to grow up with her mom a little bit. Eloy would have 10 more kids with Celestine. So Eloy is Tina's great-great-grandfather. When Eloy died in old age, he left Celestine and all of her descendants some land and money. So Celestine would have Odelia, Tina's grandmother, and Odelia would have Agnes, Tina's mother. So they started off in life in the post-slave world a little bit better off because they had some money and property, and they were all seamstresses. And this helped them really get ahead in life in a lot of ways. Again, not the first time I've read a story of former female slaves being able to get some financial independence by making dresses. Another famous case of this is Anne Lowe. Anne Lowe is not a famous name. She wasn't a famous name in her time. She still isn't. In more recent history, she's gotten her recognition for her amazing work, being a fashion designer for some of the biggest names in history, most notably Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, and she just did so many other iconic dresses that could go on and on and on. But Anne Lowe also descended from a line of seamstresses. Her grandmother also, Anne Lowe was born in 1898, her grandmother was able to get her independence by being a seamstress. So fashion wasn't just a passion for these people, it was a means of survival. So Tina grew up in Galveston. Galveston was obviously in Texas, and at that time it was segregated. It was a very small beach town, and of course, very segregated. I mean, despite Galveston being a beach town, the black part of the beach was the smallest part of the beach, and also the most dangerous because there were riptides that happened there. Like, there were so many black families living right among the beach, and that part of the beach they couldn't even go on because it was segregated. So Tina was definitely the spoiled baby of the family. She was kind of a wild child all over the place. She said she definitely had like ADHD or something like that. I mean, she talks about kind of just random memories and fun little things, like she was visiting her sister's house on her own and she slipped on a step and fell and just was like hurt. at all because she just was so clumsy and just so wild, or like being obsessed with fire also at a young age. She tried to breathe water. She'd breathe in water while underwater in a pool so she could turn into a mermaid. I also did that at one point. I'm sorry, kids should be away from pools. Sorry, future Olympic swimmers. And again, her parents were very much community supporters, so people just looked to her parents for like community guidance. And her parents were very interesting about money because they didn't have money. They didn't. And yet they always wanted to live nicely and somehow pulled together the money to do it. Her dad actually was disabled and work for him was very difficult. And that's linked to a very complicated history on his side of the family, which I'll get into. But like, for example, they wanted to build their own house. There were projects with better air conditioning and better amenities, but they wouldn't have such things. There wouldn't be a government assistance. They were on food stamps, but they still would waste money on like nice things like a ping pong table in the backyard or a swing set for Tina to have fun on in the backyard. So her mom was really the breadwinner of the family, being a seamstress. Again, this is how like a lot of their family survived and got to be as good as they are. Her dad was a longshoreman, which would be a good job theoretically, but her dad actually was blind in one eye and he was deaf in one ear. And that meant that he was considered high risk, so he can only get like the minor jobs, which means his employment was sparse. And whatever money he made, he would blow it on drinking. Because he could only be hired to like move small crates on ships, and so, again, because he was a liability. And why he had these disabilities, Tina never knew for a while. It kind of was revealed slowly bit by bit. And again, her parents were strange about money because they were poor, they wouldn't have much, they had to scrimp and save, and yet Dad blew it on drinking. The mom gave a lot of their money to the church, tithing. It's weird because Tina said a few different things about financial situation. She said, I didn't know we were poor because, we had nice things. We had swing sets and ping pong tables and all this stuff and all. But there was always this consciousness of like money was tight in the house. And Tina kind of in the book walks through just like what it's like in Galveston, the neighborhood. She was allowed to just kind of go anywhere, whenever. I mean, her parents were strict-ish in some ways, and in a lot of ways they were actually very lax for the times. So Tina, and again, everyone was their family in that neighborhood, relatives, distant relatives, non-biological people. So it just was a very interesting community to be a part of. There was this one, actually the story was really heartbreaking. There was this one very elderly lady who lived alone, and she didn't seem to have any family nearby. And no one really knew anything about her, but she was lonely. So if someone walked by her house, she'd be like, come, sit with me, come on. And nobody, like, she was kind of a mystery. And then one time, and it wasn't really known, like, how old she was, but then one time she said that she was born a slave. And they're like, oh my God, she's probably close to 100, if not more than that. And again, while it was she grew up in a very lovely community and a lot of wonderful people, being in Galveston at the time was hard. Her brothers once accidentally biked to the white part of town. They were shot at with BB guns. And in this book, there is a lot of beautiful history about Galveston. And I like that. I just love when, like, there's exposés on, like, these histories of, like, cities that are not, like, super influential. Not like New York or Los Angeles, but really are an integral part of American history and had a very big influence across the country at this time. Galveston is no exception. Yeah, it was always a small town, but it was a very integral port town, and lots of money was flowing in. Even in the segregated South, there were better opportunities for Black people in business than there were in other places. And in its heyday, it was a very elegant place to be. Very much a Southern destination spot. And when Tina was growing up, there were still remnants of that. Old buildings that showed how really wealthy and high status the place was. For reference, Galveston for a while was known as like Southern Wall Street. Galveston was the first Southern city to have a Black post office, a Black public high school, first Black library, and all of that beautiful history and wonderful community service for the Black community to prosper was destroyed in the 1900 hurricane. So basically, it was Hurricane Katrina for that time. And again, Tina's first taste of like segregation and like the complexities of race and discrimination is Tina was a very like white passing person. So she was on the bus when she was a little girl with her older sister who had much darker skin. And I guess she was like arguing with her older sister or something, and a white woman on the bus told the older sister, hey, you better be nice to that little girl, otherwise you might get fired. What? What did it mean? The older white woman thought Tina was white and that Tina's older sister was her nanny. And a young Tina who didn't know any better corrected the older woman and said, oh no, she's my sister, humiliating the older white woman, which no, you're not, she wasn't supposed to do that. That older white woman was very angry and Tina didn't understand why. She was just telling the truth. Tina as a young child would frequently go to visit her family in Louisiana, which was even more segregated, more discriminatory than the environment she grew up in. At least Galveston, because of some more wealth and high status, was a little bit better than other places. And it's this she learns about her family's history and how her dad got disabled. They were, I think it's called, was it called Weeks Island or something like that? A very small island town in Louisiana that used to be an entire plantation. And slaves had a much harder time escaping there because of the alligators around the island. So it was like basically being on Alcatraz. At one point under the island, a salt deposit was found. So the slave owners allowed a salt company to mine there and gave the slaves to the salt company. And post Civil War, the slaves, former slaves, who were sharecropping for the salt company. Tina's dad worked at the salt company. Tina's dad, I think he didn't get past like 5th grade education and he couldn't read. And he kept this a secret. It's interesting, again, the title of the book, Matriarch, the mom was always the one running everything because the mom could read and had to do all the paperwork for the dad. And Tina remembers learning this when she was a little girl and gave her dad a birthday card and her dad just kind of put it aside. He couldn't read it. Tina's dad went deaf in one ear and blind in one eye because he was working in the salt mines. The most dangerous jobs were given to Black people, young Black people whose lives were seen as disposable. The work was usually dynamiting work. Well, a dynamite went off and caused a massive cave-in. Tina's dad was trapped in a cave. Now, the salt mine company had a policy that if there's a cave-in, an avalanche, nobody goes in to go rescue them. Those persons have to go and just let that person die out if that's what's going to happen because liability. This applied for both Black and white people because if people tried to go in and dig the people out, they might cause more of a collapse and all. It might become worse. Tina's dad's brothers were basically disobeyed. They're like, no, they're going to go and rescue their brother. And they did. So they rescued Tina's dad and another person who was trapped in the salt mine, and they were taken to the hospital. Tina's dad, he got his disabilities. The other person, I think, was at risk of losing a leg, but I don't think it was said what happened to him. And the salt company sent police to the hospital to arrest Tina's dad and all people involved digging him out because they stole equipment and disobeyed orders. This caused Tina's dad to join the Communist Party, which caused more problems because, well, there was an arson attack on his house. And that's in part why Tina's dad and their mom fled Galveston. I mean, not Galveston, Louisiana for Galveston. But why Galveston of all places? Well, that's also an interesting story, actually, because that involves Tina's mom, who has just as colorful a history. So Tina's mom and dad grew up, they grew up together knowing each other. Again, I think Tina doesn't say, but I think her parents were related and possibly grew up in houses close to each other. Again, I think they were related somehow. Tina's mother, to get off the island, married at 15 to a man who seemed like he had his shit together. And that man took her to Galveston. Well, actually, I think what happened was Tina's mom, Agnes, was dating that guy. He was older. He left Louisiana for a while to go to Galveston to get his fortune. He did make money, and then he came back to go get Tina's mom to marry her and bring to his new home in Galveston, Texas. Tina's mom, Agnes, is so happy to move, and then the dream is shattered because the man is extremely abusive, her husband. And Agnes was just over her head, couldn't just, having a baby at 17 at this time and trying to keep her husband happy and run a house, she just was like collapsing. In fact, they brought another family member from their hometown in Louisiana to help out a little bit. And it's funny because, again, they're so Creole French. That family member that moved in to be like a nanny, her name was Lydia. But because of her very thick French Creole accent, she called herself Leisha. After baby number 2 was born, Agnes started to stand up to her husband and say, no more of this. And she was kicked out of the house. And she could only take one of the children, not both. So Agnes ends up moving back to her hometown and reconnects with Tina's father. Eventually, Agnes files for divorce and she gets custody of the other kid also. So now she's with Tina's dad and they're settled in, and then her dad has the accident and then he joins the Communist Party, and that causes a lot of problems in the town. So this is where I get to Tina's dad doing the whole join the Communist Party. It causes a lot of issues, and this is one of those things where I think it's just like no right answer. So when Tina's dad got arrested and all of his siblings involved in helping save him from the accident, they're all fired from the salt mines. But wait, who's going to do the dangerous work? What, white people risk their lives? No. So they were offered the jobs back. Some of the siblings and some of the people, others who were involved, do take the jobs back, but this causes a divide because then her dad and people striking for the mine were like traitors. And then I think the people who were part of the mine, they were like, well, what do we need to eat? So again, no right answer. It's just a terrible situation. So Tina's dad and mom had to flee the island because there was just too much trouble in the town and they had nowhere to go. So they go back to Galveston. Well, the mom takes her new husband to Galveston where she was living with her first husband, and they go to her first husband to ask him for help. They knew no one else there. It's the only place they knew to go to. They had no other contacts. And miraculously, Agnes's first husband helps them. He takes them in. He gets them set up with life. He completely changed. Why? It's not known. Maybe he just felt guilty and came to realize how terrible he was and wanted to compensate for it. Hard to say. He had remarried and had more kids. Maybe that changed him or something. But he was a saving grace. And again, Tina kind of just uses like random days in her life to demonstrate what the relationship to all these stories she gives, so that she kind of bounces back and forth. So then she kind of jumps to like one day she's visiting her family in Louisiana and she wants to go into a candy store, but there are white people in the store and everyone's like, oh no, Tina, you have to wait till the white people leave before you can go in. And Tina was like, why? That's ridiculous. And it's interesting, fashion and music is so ingrained in Tina's childhood. She came from a line of seamstresses, and also, not only that, but she sang with her siblings in nightclubs as well. And as Tina gets older, you know, she goes through school. For elementary school, she's in the very first, she goes to a Catholic school, one of the very first Black Catholic schools with Black nuns, I think in the entire country actually, if not the South. This is a terrible experience because Tina's parents were lax. They didn't do physical punishment. And Tina was just very kind of indulged as a child. But to go to a very strict environment where the nuns beat the children freely for just about anything, it was horrible for Tina. She couldn't take it. And because Tina just couldn't stand physical discipline, she kept running away from school. And Tina's mom said, no, Tina, you have to go back to school. Tolerate it. This is quality education you're getting. And it put a big rift between Tina and her mom. It was terrible. Tina was running away from school constantly, and Tina's parents were called into the school to talk about it. And see, I've heard so many horrible stories about Catholic schools, and I hate to make assumptions like this. I definitely heard a lot of cases of like the nuns at these schools being in the closet and using the physical discipline as a means of, you know, you get the image. And from what Tina described in going on the school, I think that could have been the case. Because in one meeting Tina's parents were having with the nuns were assuring that, you know, they had Tina under control and there wouldn't be much of a problem. And one of the nuns said they thought Tina was cute, which had kind of implications. Also, when it came to the beating, Tina's skirts were lifted up and she was whacked up here. I'm like, ugh. And later on, Tina finds out that, you know, it's interesting that her parents were poor, didn't have money, and yet they had somehow the tuition to like be able to send her to the school. Why? Because Tina's parents were actually working for the school to some capacity. Like they would be the nuns' personal chauffeurs. Her siblings would clean the driveways or something. So it was a way to like pay off Tina's tuition. And this just is like such a control thing. I mean, Tina's parents, very progressive in a lot of ways. They also still were very old school Christian. They were constantly at church and everything. And it's interesting because they would go to the same church that Tina's mom's first husband was at with his new family. Tina's mom could not receive communion because she was divorced, but the ex-husband, who she was divorced from, could receive communion at that same church. And he was cheating on his new wife also constantly. That was also just well known. And I think Tina was just, because of her rebellious spirit, I think she was just picked on from the nuns. For example, one classmate, her mom passed away. The nuns say to Tina, that classmate is struggling financially and poor, so Tina, give her one of your nice dresses. And Tina doesn't want to. Tina goes home to her mom, and her mom said, hey, that's a lesson in charity and kindness. You give her the nice dress. I mean, okay, yeah, I guess that is kind of a nice lesson in charity and helping others who are less fortunate. But at the same time, it seems to me Tina was just singled out to give something just because, again, she ran away so many times. So the nuns just always were looking for a way to just like knock her down a peg. It's just funny how Tina was just such a very like, such a wild child, such a cute, adorable, charming wild child, because her nickname was Lucy after Lucille Ball and I Love Lucy. And in terms of Tina's parents, I mean, they had, I think, their flaws and setbacks. But overall, I think they're people who need to be very much appreciated for how hard they worked to do the best they could. And this is a very good example why. So Tina's older brother, Johnny, was known as a sissy boy. I think you know what that means. And yet his parents never showed any shame about it. They just let Johnny be, and Johnny developed such a confidence that it's one of those kind of confidence where, you know, you're so comfortable in your own skin and secure, it's hard for people to get the courage to bully somebody or get the nerve to bully that person, because they know that no matter what, it won't affect that person at all, because that person has no qualms about feeling any kind of shame or insecurity about themselves. And because of that, it didn't completely stave off bullying, but it helped Johnny a lot. But around middle school, Johnny did start to get bullied a little bit because he wasn't doing well in basketball. And Tina's parents saw this as a problem that could grow into something big. So Tina's mom was like, okay, we're going to find a way to make Johnny popular. Johnny, you're going to learn to make cool clothes for all of your classmates, and then they're going to have to like you because you're going to provide them with all the cool stuff. And this works really well. So just bravo to the parents for that. I always hate when like there's like kids are bullied at school and something bad happens. Parents like, I don't know what you could have done. I don't know how to help. Like, come on. And I just love how, you know, Tina's parents gave the kids such a confidence to go out and do what they wanted, even if these are things the parents wouldn't have agreed with. Like with an older sister, the parents were like, hey, you don't go out to those civil rights protests, you'll get arrested. Tina's older sister goes and brings Tina with her. Tina's older sister is arrested, but because 6-year-old Tina is with her and crying, the police let her go. Oh, and Tina's reading the audiobook. Her southern accent comes out when she says Vietnam as Vietnam. I just think that's funny. Another example of horrific racism. At this time in the classic Old South in Galveston, driving drunk was not like as much of a problem as it is now. And if people were too drunk to drive, they would just randomly sleep on strangers' porches. It was annoying, but it wasn't like seen as like a horrible crime. So one of Tina's older brothers, he's driving, his name's Skippy. He was too drunk to drive, so he just finds a neighbor's porch and sleeps on it. The neighbor thinks that it's someone robbing her, and she calls the police. But then she gets a better look at who it is, and it's like, oh, it's Skippy. Oh, okay, never mind. I know this person. It's not a big deal. The police arrive, and the police want to take in Skippy. The neighbor calls it off, tries to call the police, and they, no, this is a misunderstanding. He wasn't robbing me. I know who this person is. He's in the neighborhood. The police take him in anyway, a drunk Skippy. Skippy tries to resist being arrested because, again, they shouldn't be, and then they call backup and swat Skippy. And this causes like a whole thing in the neighborhood. The neighborhood's coming out. Tina's parents drive over and are freaking out. This is a big issue. So Skippy is taken in by the police. And this is a really big thing to worry about, because when it comes to escalated police situations, when it came to people of color, they were taken to a certain spot on the beach where they were shot, just murdered, like, you know, George Floyd. They would say, oh, that person tried to run away and resist arrest. Tina's parents go to the police station waiting for Skippy to be taken in so they can come pick him up and hopefully just get the charges cleared, but he isn't there at the police station. And everyone's worried he was taken to the beach, which everyone knew what that meant. And Skippy was taken to the beach. He was beaten really badly. Tina has an interest in music, and she forms like a trio with her sisters. And this trio gets some legitimacy. They're winning talent competitions. They're really getting about, practicing hard. And then the other two just lose interest because they get boyfriends right before they're going to go to like a national singing competition where like there's talent scouts there. And Tina's very bitter about this. I should say that eventually Tina was allowed to leave that Catholic school and just go to a regular school. But it's interesting because at the time Tina starts reaching high school, she kind of has rifts with her mother. And her mother, a true matriarch, someone who supported the family, who was very good in providing guidance, had some faults, and it's kind of interesting to see the perspective of someone who has pretty privilege. Because Tina was always an unbelievably adorable child and a very attractive young woman also. I think with many, even girls now, when that happens, your looks become the focal point of your life, even when they don't want them to. Because Tina's telling her, I want to sing professionally, I want to be a talent. And I was like, oh, Tina, you're so beautiful that some man's probably going to want to marry you right before high school or post high school, and that's going to be your life. You know, basically a trad wife because you're so beautiful. I mean, that's a real contradiction from a woman who like really ran the roost, but okay. Tina's mom, Agnes, just becomes obsessed with Tina getting married and having a kid right out of high school because I think she just is under the assumption that's what happens with hot girls. But it's interesting because her older brother, Skip, he had a promising high school football career, college football career, but he got a girl pregnant and he had to drop out and work in the oil fields. Tina's high school life becomes worse because to comply with integration policies, the black high school has to shut down, so all the black kids have to then commute to the white high school. You could just help the neighborhoods integrate so there can be an equal balance of both at both high schools, but okay. And Tina, again, a direct confrontation with racism. She has some medical problem and needs to go to the hospital. She gets a pelvic exam, which they break her hymen. She had an intestinal virus, and it wasn't picked up because they just assumed she was pregnant. Again, this whole, oh, she's hot, beautiful, she's pregnant, obviously. Giving her a pelvic exam was illegal because they needed her dad's consent. Her dad was waiting outside the hospital and they didn't go to get him to sign papers because she was under 18. And then the hospital tried to cover this mistake and be like, oh, well, we thought the dad couldn't speak English, so that's why we didn't bother. Even her mom assumed that with that virus that she was pregnant. With that intestinal virus, Tina developed jaundice because it was overlooked, and then it turned to hepatitis. Just another funny Southern thing. She gets a job at a water park, and this water park was really big. It was supposed to be like the aquatic Disneyland. Well, that's what Tina says, but Tina also says, but it was still country enough that there were weekend alligator wrestling shows. Like, again, everyone's like, oh, Tina's so beautiful. She's gonna have a baby before high school because she's just so beautiful. Like, I can't believe it. And Tina once put a pillow under her shirt just to like go along with the joke. Then her best friend, who was a straight A student, actually gets pregnant. The thing is with Tina is that she didn't want a boyfriend at the time, but I mean, she wasn't really pursuing it hard. She just had other interests. Okay, so back to Johnny, Tina's brother. Things are going okay for him. He has the confidence and drive to really be well liked, but Tina does get the sense that he's lonely. And there were a lot of other gay kids in the high school, but being seen together was kind of like outing themselves, and that could cause problem, especially for a black gay man. So Tina has like a gay classmate or friend, and he's like, where do you all go? Where's your hiding spot? And that classmate gives Tina the address. It turns out this like very random building that Tina walked by was a secret underground gay bar for high schoolers. I mean, the drinking age wasn't really obeyed much at this time. And Tina brings Johnny there, and Johnny, it's like a whole experience. It was a disco bar before disco even became a thing. And Tina and Johnny are exposed to the gay community. It's funny, everyone thought Tina was a lesbian. She was also hit on also a lot. And Johnny, with his sewing skills, starts getting involved in designing for drag queens. So he gets this whole new wave of popularity. The running joke was all these men disappear upstairs, never seen again, and all these glamorous women descend downstairs. So after high school, Tina wants to be making it in the entertainment industry, and she wants to move to Southern California, ideally Los Angeles, but I don't know why. Well, I think because she knows people living there, she moves to San Diego. And it's interesting, San Diego at this time, San Diego is a beautiful big city here in California. I'm in California, by the way, so it's a lovely place. It has a history a lot of people don't know about. For a long time, San Diego was kind of like the Alabama of California in a way, because it was very segregated. It's where RuPaul is from, and it was very, very, very segregated. So very racist. I'll give you an example. In another book I read, another biography, it was the person, a subject of the book, was on the bus when it was announced Martin Luther King got shot in San Diego, a bus in San Diego. It was, I think, the bus radio announced it. Everyone on that bus cheered besides the person in the book. Can you believe that? So San Diego was like really, I mean, it was also a big epicenter of, I think, a lot of Black civil rights activism as well, but it was a really bad place to be at the time. Tina works at like a department store. Tina Turner actually comes into that store, and Tina Knowles, the two Tinas, they interact. Then Tina later moves to Los Angeles, but I think it just doesn't work out. Tina's parents get very sick, and Tina has to move back to Galveston and take care of them. She's actually at this point happy. Johnny has a big name for himself in the drag community in Galveston, and Tina's happy to help out. She's kind of with her people. She describes one day she's like reliving her childhood biking with her brother like she used to as a kid, and she's pulled over and harassed by the police. Nothing really changed. And the police wanted to give her a cavity search for what the charges were, a traffic violation. Tina was taken to prison. But because Tina's mom was so involved in the community, again, it's like they know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone, and Tina's escaped, the charges are dropped, and Tina's mugshot is magically expunged. When Tina's parents get a little bit better in their health, Tina moves to Houston, and for a long time, she's kind of just back and forth between Houston and Galveston. And eventually she settles in with the guy that she was dating for a while long distance when she moves back to Houston. I don't know, a lot of times she moves back and forth. And that guy, his name was Matthew Knowles. It's actually sad because they had like a last minute wedding in Vegas, and both Tina's parents have heart attacks one after another as they're getting married. It is so terrible. So Matthew Knowles in this book is interesting because, oof. Tina is very inconsistent in writing about him. There's sometimes he's writing about very lovingly and glowingly, and his flaws are, I think, watered down. And then there's times Tina rips into them. So I really don't think she, in the book, as she was writing it, she really was able to decide how good she wanted to, how nice she wanted to be to him in the book. Because sometimes she is, and sometimes she's really isn't. And sometimes she's just kind of downright shady. Like, she's like some really like jabs, like passive-aggressive, backhanded compliment lines that are kind of fun. But, so yeah, I couldn't really get a good picture of Matthew because, again, there's a lot of times he's just skewered, he's just dragged over the coals. And other times I think he's being given like a grace a little bit in writing about him in certain ways. And it's like, I think Tina didn't want to trash Beyonce's dad. Okay, but even in like the times Tina was being nicer to him, I could just tell he was a really terrible person to be with. Okay, for example, like when Tina's pregnant, she knows Matthew is cheating on her, and she kind of just gives it a pass because, well, she says, oh, I was so in love with having a family, I was going to overlook it. Like, I think she was just scared because her parents were so sick and she was having a baby that she just was too afraid to leave right now. Like, she's pregnant. It's a very difficult pregnancy. Her mom dies. Her dad is on a death's doorstep. She's going back and forth between Houston and Galveston to help. Where's Matthew helping in all this? The thing is with Matthew is he was always incredibly bad with money. Tina knew this like from the moment of dating him because I think they were living together and he seemed like he had it all together because he had a nice car, nice home. But when Tina moves in, it turns out that he's like, all these creditors want him. And Matthew's like, it's fine, I'll take care of it. Those habits never go away, just like the cheating, if I'm maybe foreshadowing for you a little bit. Tina writing about her dad dying was really difficult. Close to death, his mind was going a little bit, and he would revert back to the Creole language, where I guess all the tenses become past tenses or something. And it's like he's speaking a completely different other language. Well, it is a different language. Like everything's just completely different, so he couldn't be understood. So Beyonce is born, and her name is Beyonce because she wants to give a real connection. Because Beyonce just looks like Tina and Tina's mom and just, just keeping true to the heritage of matriarchs. So Beyonce is Beyonce. When Beyonce is a little girl, Tina knows that her marriage will not last. She keeps forgiving the cheating, but like it's based really just for Beyonce's sake. So Tina then enrolls in beauty school at age 31 so she can get a job. And she was kind of like a house mama to all the students in a lot of ways. Beyonce, I'm not like the biggest follower of Beyonce. So to the Queen Bee fans, let me know. Can you imagine Beyonce being very introverted and shy as a little girl? Can you? Because Beyonce had a really rough time in school. The other kids didn't want to play with her. She was very lonely, and it was a big problem. And because Beyonce was having so many problems in school, Tina actually dropped out of beauty school dropout. to make sure she could be there for Beyonce. And again, she was so worried about having to be a single mom in her own working late hours and not being there for a child who clearly needed a lot of emotional support. But eventually, Tina admitted she was using Beyonce just as an excuse to not have to go through the pain of divorce, but Matthew was just causing all kinds of problems. For supplementary income, Tina actually opened like a home salon of her own, and it was actually quite successful. And she was very good at saving money. Eventually, Tina opened up her own salon, and she leased a place in a very artsy neighborhood, and it was a big success. Her intention was once she had the business up and running, she would leave Matthew. She didn't say that was her plan, but Matthew got really excited about this venture and he got involved in it, making leaving all that much harder. And again, this is the part where I think Tina is like covering for Matthew in a lot of ways, because she wants to leave him. She has her own income now, so she's doing quite well. And then they go to counseling together and they discover that they loved building a business and empire together. And it helped them fall back in love. Sure, Dan. And in a weird reflection of like Tina's own childhood, where just like the entire neighborhood was family, she kind of reflected that with Beyonce's childhood, because, well, Kelly Rowland was growing up with them actually. Like Tina was a mom to everyone also, just like her mom was a mom to everyone. Beyonce was going to school with her older cousin Ebony, and Ebony was like an older sister, and Tina was very much also like Ebony's mom, even though she was technically Ebony's aunt. The living situation Tina writes about this time is a little weird, because I was under the impression that she moved away from Matthew and that she was actually living with Ebony's mom and Beyonce as like two single moms together in the same home. But I guess she was living with Matthew. I kind of think they probably separated and got back together a few times. So Tina and Beyonce were bouncing between homes, sometimes as a single mom living with other single people or family members, and then just with Matthew. That was very confusing to track. But in a way, I think I see this a lot when it came to Beyonce's childhood. Beyonce was very introverted and had a hard time expressing herself. And I think introverted people get mistaken with a lot of other problems because they just aren't vocalizing what they really think and feel, me included. So it's because the teacher said Beyonce was doing bad in school and that she might need to be held back. And Tina called them out on this. They're like, okay, we're like barely into the year, you didn't give Beyonce time. Are you sure, she got the chance to catch up or get the proper attention tutoring she needed? So Tina got Beyonce a tutor, and what do you know? Beyonce actually was really good and she caught up very quickly and there were no problems. But the school was just like, she sucks, she's terrible at school, we're just gonna hold her back. But something Beyonce was good with expressing herself as was in singing classes and dancing. It was really actually dance classes that got her into music. Beyonce's dancing instructor had 7-year-old Beyonce competing against high schoolers. And Beyonce was competing in competitions and winning. And because this is Texas, Beyonce has to compete in the pageant circuit, but it's just more so Beyonce can show off her singing and dancing talents. And eventually I guess Tina arranges with the pageants that Beyonce can compete in the talent portions, not the rest. Oh, and Johnny as a character vanished for a while in the book. The last time he was written about, he had a boyfriend whose nickname was Peanut, of all things. And Peanut was kicked out of his home for being gay, and I guess moved in with Johnny or some relative or something, and they became boyfriends. And all this time later, he and Peanut remained boyfriends, and they relocated to Houston, and Johnny makes pageant dresses for Beyonce. And Solange has talent in music, and also a girl group with Beyonce is formed because a vocal coach just says they should be. Reflecting Tina's time also, as when she was a part of a singing trio. Peanut tragically died of cancer, and because of prejudice, everyone believes it's like, oh no, he had AIDS. No, he didn't have AIDS. He died of breast cancer. Yes, men cannot get breast cancer. It was really hard on Johnny. And Peanut's family took everything. They took his car, his possessions, everything Johnny wanted to remember Peanut by gone because they weren't legally married. Johnny was not allowed to the surface. Quick side note, I just want to insert this because this stuff happens to this day. A few years ago, my company was having like a pride event where I was working at the time. And for context, one of the speakers in the panel, she was a Black woman. She wasn't queer herself, but her very, very best friend was gay and Black. And he was amazing. And he actually tragically took his own life. And the family never accepted it. And they kept it hush. So my coworker, she actually wasn't even allowed to come to the service because she knew his sexuality, and anyone who knew him that way was not allowed. But she said she had to fight just to get him buried in the suit he loved the most. It was such a sad story. Hello, editing me here. I made a gross oversight and I am banging my head against the table right now because this is just, it's really gross that I forgot to add this in. Uncle Johnny, he would end up passing away of AIDS-related complications. And at the end of his life, he and his lovely sister, Tina, they weren't on the best terms because Tina was worried about him and his dating life, given AIDS was spreading and was being very like invasive, and Johnny didn't like that, so he distanced himself from her, but he would end up getting infected. And he did pass away, but his legacy lives on because, again, so much of Beyonce's career was in part because of him. So I'm sorry, I don't know how I skipped over that. That is such a disgusting oversight. I don't know what the hell, but just letting you know. But he was loved by the family and he did so much for them. So that will never be forgotten. In terms of Beyonce being the star of the group, Tina says, oh, Matthew was hardest on her because he knew she was a star and all. I think he just saw a financial opportunity. And their salon is still going. And, but, well, again, this is a little difficult. Tina says the salon's very successful, but then they have a tax lien and the IRS is after them. I think because, again, Matthew was handling the finances and he just was terrible at it. They also started, interestingly, this, it's a trade publication for hairstylists, but really it was like made to look like a really professional magazine. And this magazine was very in demand and really in a way helped glamorize the hair industry, the hairstyling industry. Kind of like an early version of like Glam Squad kind of thing. And trade like hair shows, and a lot of people wanted this trade publication, and it really helped Tina and Matthew get their name out in the industry and be very, very well respected figures. But also it was expensive to produce and it was never really producing much, and I think Matthew just wanted to keep it going for the fame, not because of any business lucrativeness of it. There's just all sorts of chaos happening at this time. Solange is doing singing a little bit, and tailing around with Beyonce, but I think it's just more so she can be close to her sister, like how Beyonce clung to Ebony. And eventually, Beyonce kind of wants to like do her own thing as older sisters do. So Tina puts both of them in therapy, actually. First together and then later separate. Tina was very picky about a therapist. Tina wanted a black psychiatrist who could understand black families, and also she found one who was gay and reminded her a lot of Johnny, and that was a very good connection. But that therapist ended up dying of AIDS. And again, it's interesting because Tina had to relearn the lessons of colorism she learned as a child, like that incident of like her on the bus with her older sister, because Solange was getting bullied a lot more in school than Beyonce was, because Solange was more ethnic looking. Her hair was pulled, her skin was touched, and they lived in a very ethnic neighborhood that was very diverse. And so the other black students at that school, that posh school, did not like Solange because she was too black, and Solange didn't like them because they were too whitewashed. And the white kids didn't want Solange because they were bullying her. And the teachers did nothing about this. And then there's this horrific story that it's one of those like, what? I had to like replay it a few times. I guess there was like some history of race in the school lesson or something, of ethnic race. And the white teacher was like explaining how terrible the N-word was and then talking about it. But in explaining it was prompting Solange to talk about it. So Solange said the N-word, and the teacher was like, oh, she said now she's in trouble. What? You, a white person, are talking about it and using that word, and then you prompt a black student to use it, and then you're punishing that black student. This is like so, all sorts of messed up. So finally, Solange had to switch schools. Tina says, I finally left Matthew, but there's a few finallys in this story. So this is, I think, one of the first, where after Matt, they have a dispute about the magazine, and Tina wants to discontinue. Matthew's like, no, I can make it going, and it looks awful, and it's not going to make any money. So she says, I'm done. At this point, they take in Kelly to live with them, but she gets back with Matthew shortly after. And I hate to say this, I think Tina was having a hard time confronting how she wasn't there for Solange in a lot of ways because of busyness with Beyonce. Why do I say that? Because Tina's a little contradictory when it comes to writing about it, because at first she's like, oh, Solange didn't want to tour around with Beyonce or the group and everything, so she would be at home. And I wanted to make sure she got equal attention. So I would constantly, in the middle of touring, fly back, take like breaks to fly back to be with her. But Solange didn't really want to be with me because she didn't like that like uncertainty of time or that limited time and everything. And she would be withdrawn. And people would say I was neglecting Solange, but Solange is just a homebody and just didn't like her environment changing, and I understood that. I think, I'm sorry, Tina, but I think from Solange's perspective, it's a very different story. I think Solange didn't want to tour around because she didn't want Beyonce getting all the attention and her having to see that constantly. I think she knew that you were just flying back just to fulfill your quota of being with her, even though her mind was likely elsewhere. And I think Solange was withdrawn because she just knew that, you know, you were too occupied and she didn't want to have to play a guessing game of how much time she was going to get. I think the touring made her more introverted. I'm sorry. Interesting enough, the name Destiny's Child, Tina said she got it because she prayed on it. But it was supposed to just be Destiny, but then there was a gospel group that had that. But I mean, praying on it, I mean, it does have very religious implications. And then the fact Tina was a very big church person and she was praying, I mean, it kind of makes sense that would naturally what would come to her. And fashion styling, and again, keep going, this is where Tina's background in fashion comes in. Tina was very involved in the looks of fashion and aesthetics and styling. And she wasn't just, you know, like a mom, like, oh, just try this on, just like, putting a rack of clothing. Tina was very involved in the curation of Destiny's Child Beyonce's aesthetics. But this is in part because styling was a nightmare, because when Destiny's Child was getting recognition, yeah, designers were sending stuff, but because they were Black, they were like putting in the least amount of effort. They'd send clothing, but there'd be just like 1 or 2 good pieces, and there'd be instructions that only Beyonce could wear those pieces. And Tina would have to then supplement for the rest, also making her own things. And she would get very creative in making a lot of interesting pieces last minute out of a lot of thrifted stuff. Later on, Solange would say she wanted to tour, and then with Beyonce, and then her parents were like, hey, you can't just do this because of nepotism, you gotta take classes and dance and rise to the occasion, and Solange did. But again, I wonder how much of that was just out of jealousy and neglect. But then Solange got knocked up at 17 and wanted to keep the baby. And again, Matthew just sucks as a sucks as a husband. Tina admits that she actually didn't know how to live alone. Like, she said she didn't want to be alone. I think that's the real reason. Because she is in the middle of styling a photo shoot for Beyonce. She has to go to Solange's baby shower. There's a kitchen accident. She gets 3rd-degree burns, and she's in the hospital. And she still wants to go to the photo shoot and the baby shower and all. And where's Matthew in all this? Solange moves to Idaho with her baby daddy, who has a football career, and I guess she just kind of becomes a trad wife. She ends up painting and doing art. And I'm sorry, like, it's very clear Solange just wants attention and wants to be loved and have a stable family home life, which is why I think she decided to keep the baby and move to Idaho, of all places. And Tina writes about this, painting it in a way that I think is just very misleading, because she makes it like, oh, Solange just wanted that quiet artist life in nature. She was painting. I'm like, Solange wanted a stable family life. She got a baby. This is what her way of doing it. And then she got bored, and she's just bored out of her mind, so she resorts to painting, which she wasn't interested in prior. I'm like, and of course that doesn't last, and Solange divorced and moves back. Oh, also, again, about Solange and her first marriage, in commenting about the bad decision, Tina was like, oh, Solange, she's very traumatized because she lost her therapist at a young age, the first one to when he died. I'm like, sorry, I think you're just grasping at whatever excuse. But now Tina, well, she does and she doesn't talk about her clothing venture, the House of Darion, or Darion. So, sorry, my horrible French accent. But anyway, if people who follow that know that this clothing business that Tina was very passionate about was kind of a train wreck. And Tina talks about it here and there, but yeah, I, apart from the book, want to give a little bit of my perspective on the history of it. So basically, Tina was very much the stylist, the art director of Destiny's Child and Beyonce, and she had an immense talent for it because fashion and music was in Tina's blood. Like, long before Beyonce, it just was always there. I don't dispute that. But the House of Darion was never super successful, and I looked back at like old posts and press releases about it, and here's just what I think about it. So the House of Darion, I think, was announced in 2004 and launched in 2004 or 2005. And because of Tina's celebrity connections at the time, it got a really big push. It was featured in Oprah. It was featured in, well, at the time, fashion blogs, in fashion publications. So, it got everything it needed for a very ideal brand launch. A lot of other publications that have written and YouTube videos that look back on the House of Darion and why it never got to where it could be is the brand just always had a bit of an identity crisis. What was the House of Darion? Was it a luxury fashion house? Was it just like a mass retailer fashion brand for the average woman? Was it a performance wear kind of brand? Was it just a name to license to be associated with Beyonce so you could have Beyonce merch? That's hard to say. There isn't a definitive answer. Even Tina talking about it at the time and a little in her book, it's so confusing because she said she wanted to be inspired by the era of fashion her mother was active in, 1940s, but also her childhood, 1970s disco, but also modern streetwear. That's too many eras that don't really go together. And I love that Tina's creative spirit was in this brand and everything she loved. I do wish we could live in a world where the art identity or the creative identity of any kind of art piece can be just whatever the hell inspires you, related to each other or not. But this is a business, and a business has to be consumable to, well, the consumer, which means, you know, you can't just be in your own head, you know, putting down whatever you personally like, whether that's a marketable product or not. Like, I write fiction, I like novels. There's a difference between writing something that is going to be consumable and marketable to the public versus just whatever weird stuff is in my head that I put down on paper that'll only make sense to me because I'm reading and writing out of the context of my own head, which no one else can understand because I'm just that crazy. I will say, though, Tina's brilliance does, in fact, still show in the House of Darion because she wanted like a blend between luxury and streetwear, which is very much would be the design DNA for Ivy Park, Beyonce's now defunct brand. And again, Ivy Park, when Ivy Park launched, it was a big deal. I knew so many people who were crazy to buy the stuff, men and women, but it just kind of faded out. Again, it didn't really, again, have a strong enough brand identity to last or to keep up with trends. I noticed that, and now the Ivy Park just redirects to Adidas, the partner of Ivy Park, but it had its moment, just like the House of Darion. I'll give you an example of the confusion of the House of Darion. Here's a 2005 post from Oprah.com showing off a House of Darion fashion show, which aired on the show. Look at these pieces. They're very nice, but a lot of them don't even look like they're coming from the same collection or the same fashion house. Like, what is this? Like, look at this piece, this like kind of suit dress thing with the buttons. It's beautiful. It's everything 2005 luxury fashion is, but it looks like it's coming from a completely different collection than the other more streetwear kind of stuff. Same with this dress with the belt. I mean, yeah, it's luxury and it has more of a casual look, but it isn't casual enough to fit with the other casual pieces, and it's not luxury enough to fit with that luxury piece I showed, and also it's not enough of a bridge between the two. And again, the design influences are all over the place. We have streetwear, we have casual, we have more romantic lingerie-ish kind of looking stuff. We have woven textures, there's frills, then there's more hippie looking stuff, then there's just more like middle-aged mom pieces. This two-piece ruffled bottom suit with the capri pants and long sleeve shirt, I don't even know who would have worn this in 2005. It's nice to look at for 2005 aesthetic, but again, I don't even know who's supposed to buy this, and the other pieces that go with it don't give me a better idea. This long flowy piece, this dress is beautiful. I think people should be wearing this now, but why did we change suddenly from casual wear to something to wear on the red carpet? Only then for, again, casual mom wear. That again brings me to another issue about the House of Darion. When it launched as it was going to be all these things, seemingly to be a little bit more in the luxury space with a street influence, but then very quickly they established a kids line, and then they had mass retail partnerships. And then there was a bedding line. Like, none of these things are follow-ups to the original, so the original goal of the house just kind of got lost, and it just seemed to just be a licensing deal for whatever big companies wanted to work with them. See, that's the problem. I think the House of Darion was more a fashion house than a fashion brand. Like, it was more like an American version of a couture house. There were many fashion houses or couturiers that were very influential but not super profitable. This was more a medium of Tina to express her artistic talent than it was really a business. Because of Tina's connections, she can kind of skip the line in having to go through the usual channel steps to launch a brand, like merchandising, marketing research. She just had all these celebrities that could just push the stuff very quickly, and all these business retailer partners that could just easily also push her stuff out there. But when you're in fashion school, well, some fashion schools let you just be creative and just do whatever right away. Other fashion schools are a little different. You have to learn merchandising even before you get to design. Why? Because merchandising is how you train your design brain to design for the public, not just what you like. But I'm sure what you like also is very good and should be a big part of it as well. Since the time frame I'm talking about is the 2000s, but all this information still applies now. When you're walking into a store, the store knows it has a very limited time period to get your attention. And especially the different departments, like a department store, the different departments are fighting for a customer's attention. And they need the experience, the aesthetic experience when you're seeing that from afar to want to draw you in. And that was done by the customer knowing immediately what they're in for when they take those steps close to that department. Think of like the makeup section of any store. There's different aisles. Some are going to be much more louder than others with much more wild brands, some with more neutral brands. The customer needs to feel secure when they walk in that they're walking in the right aisle and not taking a misstep. We have busy lives. Can't afford to take 5 extra steps to the right aisle. It sounds like kind of like the Hunger Games of retail. But in a way, when you learn about like buying, being a buyer or merchandising, that's kind of what it is actually, a little bit. So imagine going to, I don't know, whatever stores carry the House of Darion, and you see the collection from afar. From afar, you're not going to get a comprehensive view of what that collection is going to hold. And are you going to be compelled to go and inspect farther and actually go through each individual piece? Maybe the name House of Darion might, but if that wasn't there, would you still? Probably not. You'd probably want to go to a rack where all the clothes are similar in style, and you can go there and know that you will be able to narrow down your choices much quicker over there. I mean, Tina definitely wanted to make her items luxury and accessible, an idea that was very ahead of the times. But I think where she was mistaken is luxury and accessible doesn't mean some pieces are luxury, some pieces are street in the same collection, or you're going to have one luxury line one moment and then the next release is going to be something lower end, so neither customer will be happy with the next release. It really means understanding what is luxury, what is accessible, and then blending two together in a new design that, doesn't necessarily relate to what she was personally interested in or her personal influences, but she really wanted to stick to what she knew and what she personally influenced her aesthetic, which is very nice, but again, you can't just be in your own head designing like that unless you're just running your own little art studio kind of thing. But speaking of art studio, I found one old listing in Houston for a House of Darion media center run by Matthew Knowles as a place to showcase new and up-and-coming talent. So I think, was the House of Darion also like a media experience center that linked to Matthew's music management business? I don't really know. Look, either way, the House of Darion wasn't a vanity project. It was something Tina was very passionate about, but well, it's interesting because her salon was very ahead of its time and very avant-garde, and also just very pioneered a lot of in the black hair industry that Tina I don't think ever really got credit for. But that was because Tina, due to, because she potentially was going to divorce her husband, had to be in the community out there and understanding what they needed to be able to give it. And, she was scrappy with it also. But I think because she started at too much money and too much fame with the House of Darion, she felt she could just kind of just throw money at whatever was interesting her, or whatever her personal nostalgia, or whatever she just liked at the time, and not, again, actually be part of the fashion community. But anyway, it was written here and there a little bit, but it's funny because when Tina wrote about it, it was more in relation to the House of Darion styling Beyonce and her iconic looks, not the other fashion ventures. But anyway, I think it's interesting. I should say that Tina does say, I partner with these business people for the House of Darion, but they just weren't interested in it. Like, why weren't they interested in it? I think the problem is they just didn't know what to do with Tina's vision for it. In 2008, I guess Tina thought the marriage was okay, but Matthew confessed to having another affair. And Tina was like, well, I'll forgive you again, but you have to end it. But oops, that woman is pregnant. And just Matthew, I guess, was Beyonce's manager, but I don't know, he did nothing. It just seems like, again, Tina was the one just doing everything. So this time, Tina does serve Matthew with divorce papers, but Matthew won't accept it. But eventually, they have to settle with going through, and then Matthew goes on to live his life. Pretty much that, let's see, like, the book just jumps from there, I guess, like 2008-ish time period to the Renaissance tour. So pretty much all of the 2010s are completely missing, including the infamous elevator incident. Jay-Z is mentioned like twice. He's barely mentioned even at Beyonce's wedding. I think that's interesting. But, yeah. And also the lemonade era is mentioned, but oh well, there's plenty of story. Overall, this was a wonderful book. Please, we need older celebrities writing these memoirs. Please. Anyway, I had a good time. Hope you had a good time watching this video. Thank you.